Hello everyone, Macintosh here. In this video, I will be talking about Vanguard and the recent Operation Nemesis event hosted by CSP Games. This has so far become the most comprehensive playtest I have ever seen to date for a game that is still in development as a pre-alpha by the company. It ran from September 16 to the 2nd of October, and it was publicly available to anyone who has an EVE Online account, even for alpha players who do not have an active subscription with the Spaceship MMORPG, which has been running since May of 2003. There are several surprises that I have seen in this game. While I do know that Vanguard is far from finished and still lacking certain features such as a secondary market, corporations, controller accessibility, teams larger than 9v9, and so on, Vanguard is further along than I expected at this stage, and my experience with it has been positive overall. But the current iteration of Vanguard during the Operation Nemesis event was not without its pitfalls and bugs. I will be covering those as well in this video. This one is going to be a long video, so go get yourself a cup of coffee and sit back down once you are ready. Don't bother asking me how long it took to write this script. I'm going to be starting off this topic with an interesting surprise. Linux. No. CSP Games does not currently support Linux for Vanguard, not in an official capacity anyways. They only enabled Easy Anti-Cheat to function on Linux. Beyond that, Linux users are left to figure out the rest for themselves. If anything stops working properly with Vanguard, we're on our own. I think the same is true for EVE Online, although EVE Online does not use Easy Anti-Cheat. While Vanguard does not work on Linux out of the box, even when using Steam's Proton compatibility layer, people on the Vanguard Discord were able to get it to work on Linux in less than a day. It initially started off with just a couple of threads talking about it with 2 or 3 users, primarily Possum, Katrina, and Sakan. Those 3 put together really got the ball rolling. Eventually, CSP Lumi created a thread in the general chat focused on Linux and how to address the problem with Vanguard not working out of the box. From that point on, the topic snowballed into a full-blown think tank covering every little issue plaguing Linux users during Operation Nemesis. At least 3 of the devs, CSP Lumi, CSP Avalon, and CSP Shortfall, got in on the discussion, taking in feedback from the players. Particularly anyone with a Linux distro installed was contributing to the discussion. Whether it was compiling a script shared via GitHub or making simple instructions on how to get the game to work as a workaround, every little bit was useful feedback. In the end, Linux users have been able to play Vanguard during the event. There were players who struggled to get it to work properly, even with a workaround, but that only revealed a separate underlying issue with the game that appeared for both Linux and Windows users. One specific example is when some players got stuck in the Infomorph configuration screen at the start of the game. To clarify, this does not guarantee Vanguard will have official Linux support by early access, but it does give me hope that Vanguard now has a slightly higher chance of working on Linux out of the box with or without official support come early access. And let's say it does not. What then? Well, we now have an army of penguins ready to take on the challenge, but this time with experience. Unfortunately, because of the workaround that was used and because this current installation of Vanguard was set up as a non-Steam game, I do not have any idea how many hours I have already invested playing this game thus far. I can only estimate based on how many hours of recordings I have on my SSD drive. Moving on. The game starts off with the Infomorph configuration screen, where you first create a name for your workload. In my case, you see me using the name Macintosh VR with the VR at the end, similar to my YouTube channel. This account is a non-Steam account created using the EVE Online account management system. My Steam account is where the original Macintosh, without the VR at the end, resides. CCP Games has adopted this weird QR code like aesthetic, where each war clone is given a unique pattern, likely as a means of identifying the player. A strange departure from the traditional means of identifying players by their name. When you kill a Vanguard war clone, only their QR code, is shown on the extraction screen. Although you can still spot their name on the death screen when you die. Now, upon creating your character name, you are immediately deployed to a random planet as a fresh new war clone already armed with a standard rifle and a mining laser. You are greeted by the Archive, an AI voice that updates you on the status of your missions, and a woman on the comms with a nice voice to help ease you in. The new player journey is a path meant to show you how the game works, such as how to interact with objects, manage your weapon loadout, how to use your inventory to build things, and how to navigate the world around you. This is also where you are introduced to little bits and pieces of New Eden lore through either the descriptions in the expeditions or through visuals when you are on the ground. Upon completion of the new player journey, you are presented with the Fulcrum interface, which has a command center-like room as a backdrop. This is reminding me of the Merc quarters from Dust 514, where you had access to all of the tools you needed to access the battles, the marketplace, drop suits and vehicle fittings, and leaderboards. The difference here with Vanguard is you can't walk around this time, and the camera movement within the room is limited to which menu you selected. If you select the industry menu, the camera will pan to the fabricator, where you see what looks like futuristic laser printer. The fittings menu moves the camera to the dropsuit area, and the deployment menu brings you to the map in the center. The lore behind this is that you are residing within the Fulcrum Station in Zarzak, an obscured star system that was uncovered by the Death of the Circle and later revealed to all of New Eden at least a year or so, at least last year or so. Zarzak also resides within Jovian space and has remained concealed from even the Deathless until the collapse of the Jove Directorate, one of the big five that formed Concord. You will see that name often. Concord was formed in response to the empires initiating first contact with each other after thousands of years of total isolation since the collapse of the Eve Gate, severing the cluster from the Milky Way galaxy for good. Their official name is the, quote, Consolidated Cooperation and Relations Command, end quote, or Concord for short. And before I continue with the game, let me finish off this lore talk by mentioning that the largest and most powerful branch of Concord is the Directive Enforcement Department, or DED, another name you will be familiar with as you progress through the expeditions in Vanguard and the active challenges in EVE Online. It was only until recently that the DED was given increased jurisdiction on the planets below, as their jurisdiction was mostly limited to space. Even then, their power and presence varies from empire to empire, and sometimes even within region to region within the empires, due to local governments and magnates having strong opinions about Concord in general. Next up, we look at the icons that represent the various items in your inventory. Personally speaking, I am not much of a fan anymore of the diamond iconography used for the chipsets, salvage materials, ammunition, and equipment. They are too similar to one another within their respective groups. As one example, I was unable to tell at a glance which chipset does which. I have had to hover my mouse over each one to figure that out. Then there are the different tiers, such as standard and flawed. I recommend remaking the icons so that they look readily apparent what each does. But for now, they are functionally okay, and they do the job just fine. If I can identify an item by merely squinting, that would be better. Expanding a little bit on the iconography, let's look at the inventory management. It is a mess. Simple as that. When you first start the game, the inventory isn't all bad, to be honest. But as you run through the expeditions, complete various contracts, come home with loads of manufacturing materials and random bits and bobs you just happen to scoop up by accident, you start to realize what I'm talking about. There is no auto stack function, no sorting or filtering controls, and there is no container system for organizing different materials. The last one is important because if you want to give players the option to specialize in industries such as mining, researching, and manufacturing, you will need a container system for keeping everything organized, as these operations will eventually scale up over time. And with Bastions entering the mix, likely by summer 2026 for early access, that is even more important. One additional recommendation, and this is just a personal preference of mine, is to give players the option to manually rescale certain windows, such as the inventory, while in the Fulcrum interface. EVE Online lets you do this already, whether you are docked or undocked. Setting aside the icons, I do admit that I like the way how the menus and submenus look. The rounded, glassy look that fades the background with soft contrast looks and feels easy on the eyes, and the submenus pop out without intruding on screen real estate. The progression layout for the various assignments is easy to read, while the missions and rewards are clear and easy to understand. The heads-up display also utilizes some of the diamond iconography for health, shields, ammunition, weapons, points of interest, pings, and contract selection. However, it does make the HUD look cleaner and organized, and the mission tracker on the upper left corner helps with reminding players what they need to do. Honestly, I think CCP should aim for a HUD design closer to Dust 514. My personal opinion. The tracker is particularly well done since the primary and secondary texts use highlights and grays to differentiate thematic plans. The texts on the contracts are not verbose, and they are to the point. They also contrast well enough to not accidentally blend with the environment you deploy into, which can cause reading problems. I did often lose my sense of direction while on the various maps like Carrion or Maelstrom, but thankfully the compass tape at the top of the HUD, along with clear waypoints to points of interest and objectives, helped me quickly regain my bearings. Speaking of directions, the map has clearly undergone some changes since the last public playtest. The base map is brighter. The icons contrast better, and they highlight the various points of interest based on the contract you have selected. Although I think CCP should implement filters to help declutter the map, because I easily get lost in the weeds just looking at it. Another recommendation for CCP is to give players the option to orient the map based on whether they want it to align true north or their current heading for players who prefer that style of navigation. In addition to that, perhaps make the player location marker more prominent or be actively highlighted for a moment when the player brings up the map. Now that we got all that out of the way, finally I get to the contracts and expedition system. Expeditions in Vanguard are a way for players to get involved with the events that happen throughout New Eden. Operation Nemesis is the first real example of that system at play here, because it is actually affecting players in EVE Online every time you complete an assignment that is tied to that specific expedition. Here's how it works. EVE Online players can see a progress gauge via the encounter screen of the agency window. This is found under Vanguard Nemesis. Whenever that gauge completely fills up, an active convoy will spawn in space, and its location will appear on the map for everyone to see. This gauge can be filled by completing active challenges within EVE Online as a capsuleer. One of these challenges, however, requires you to complete assignments within Vanguard as a warclaw. So once the active convoy spawns in space and is located, players can attack those convoys for loot, which can be traded in for the Deathless Circle within EVE Online for rewards. Now, so Operation Nemesis is practically a massive joint effort between two groups of players within two games. You can even see the progress gauge update in real time while you are in EVE Online. Keep in mind that I am referring to expeditions, assignments, and contracts as three separate categories. Expeditions are a series of assignments, and assignments are a series of contracts that are completed while deployed on the planets below. As I said before, completing assignments in EVE Vanguard affects the progress gauges in EVE Online and thus eventually triggers certain events within EVE Online. This is done using the Quasar system that CCP Games has developed over the years to function as a backend for communicating events between Vanguard and EVE Online. This allows CCP to continue working on both games without needing to drastically alter each other's code for this to happen. And thus, we finished talking about one of Vanguard's main selling points. We'll get to the other selling point later in this video. Each expedition's assignments are represented by branches, giving players a series of choices they can make to complete each expedition. As you activate one of the branches, the opposite branch is locked out. So do read the descriptions and objectives of each branch carefully before you make your decision to hit activate. Once activated, you are unable to go back and change your mind. Contracts are categorized into different types. The first one we will cover are the sabotage contracts. Sometimes it can be as simple as planting an explosive nova charge onto a transmitter and then dip out. Other times you hack a terminal to upload data while holding off enemy forces trying to stop you. You might also see a contract that is as simple as kill X number of Upwill operatives or something like that. The next contract type is salvage. This will range from recovering neural profiles of dead clones strewn throughout the maps and delivering them to the quartermaster at drop-off points. Yes, he is involved. Getting access to damaged recovery pods that crashed onto the planet's surface and looting specific containers. It is worth mentioning that some of these contracts will require you to craft specific utility items that you will need to complete the contracts. This can range from planting explosives that you have to assemble in the field or in the fabricator at the fulcrum station to relay units that you have to install on specific terminals. One very specific and annoying thing I found with the contracts, though, is there is no way to cancel them. It happened to me a few times already where I had to pick a specific contract type while I was deployed and accidentally picked the wrong type. However, because I was unable to cancel it, I was stuck either having to finish that one first before selecting the correct one this time, or just extract and redeploy. It would be easier if I was given the option to abort the contract, or at the very least stack multiple active contracts, as trying to complete one can often lead to accidentally completing another while en route to the primary objectives. As to what players on both sides stand to benefit from all of this, Capsuleers in EVE Online will earn rewards similar to what they typically receive for other events, like the Crimson Harvest for each of the active challenges they meet. At the same time, the War Clones in EVE Vanguard will get blueprints, materials, credits, and weapons as they complete each assignment, as well as bonus rewards for completing expeditions. This is not including the various loot drops players on both sides, along with promoting active coordination between the two games. This pretty much concludes the topic of expeditions. Next up, we cover deployments, specifically the star map to begin with. The holographic star map at the center of the fulcrum interface represents the entire map of New Eden. This is the same map you have access to in EVE Online, except I do not see any tools like filters or even a search function in Vanguard. The only options I see here is just the few planets with different biomes you can deploy into. There is not much use for those tools right now if we only have 5 or 6 planets to look at in the map, but as the game develops and more planets, constellations, regions get added to the game, it will start to become a mess to sift through. And so CCP games should add basic functions like planet or star system search, alliance control map, filters for separating planets by biomes, or available resources to help. Clicking on any one of the locations of the star map will show you the names of that planet, the type of environment you expect to see, the security rating of the planet, similar to security ratings in EVE Online, and which minerals you are able to find on the surface. Once selected, you hit the deploy button on the bottom right corner of the screen, and off you go. One little nitpick I have about the deploy button is that it is not. Let me say that again. One little nitpick I have about the deploy button is that it is not made clear where you can select the option to deploy solo or deploy with a squad. I noticed a small drop-down menu just to the right of the deploy button that shows you the options. Perhaps CCP should make that just a little bit more obvious for new players to notice as they're about to hit the button. Now for the next part of this topic, insertions. I like to think that the lore behind the deployment screen is that your mind is being transferred to a war barge orbiting the planets that you selected for your expeditions, and then immediately transferred to a war clone body stored in its launch bays. From there, you wake up already inside an orbital drop pod on its way down to the planet. You get a brief view of the planet as you drop down before the friction of the atmosphere starts to burn the hull, and then the shield closes up in front of you for the remainder of the drop. To the right, you see an indication of how far from the ground you are as you drop, with altitude in meters shown next to it. The pod breaks up around you and spits you out down towards the ground from about 100 meters in the air. From there, you continue to drop as your drop suit's inertial dampeners activate to cushion your fall and do a superhero landing, causing a crater to form upon impact. This feature was a pleasant surprise because it's very similar to how war clones deployed back in Dust 514. A couple of differences here is that the inertial dampeners seem to only activate for the insertion process and nothing else, and you don't spawn inside the MCC. The first point is a bit disappointing because players in Dust 514 used to be able to reactivate the inertial dampeners as long as they have enough altitude. That meant jumping off drop ships or tall buildings. The insurgency maps, where you engage with other players in a team of 9v9 environments, do have MCCs roaming around that you have to defend, but you are unable to jump off of them. You still respawn as if you were deploying normally on an expedition. In my opinion, you should be able to jump from the MCC and be given the option to manually activate the inertial dampeners, given enough height. And seeing how far up the MCCs are loitering, it is reasonable to assume they are more than 100 meters above the ground, which is the altitude from which you pop out of the drop pod anyways, and get spat out like spinach at about 100 miles per hour. From here, you open up the command menu where you get to select the different contracts available to you. This is where these specific contracts are revealed to you. Back in the Fulcrum Station, where you selected a planet on the star map, you were not told which specific contracts were available. It is only as soon as you get to the ground you get access to that specific information. If you're by yourself, you get to choose which contracts to work on. If the assignment of your expedition tells you to complete a sabotage contract, you will give that contract priority. The listing will tell you which types of contracts you have available. So far, after a lot of deployments, I have consistently had the type of contract I was looking for be available to me on every deployment. So don't worry about deploying to a planet where the contract type you're looking for is not available. Except for insurgencies, though. Do not deploy to a planet that is dedicated to insurgencies. There are no contracts there. As for squads, only the squad leader has control over the contract selection. In a situation where each of your squad mates has different assignments with a different contract type, the squad leader can coordinate with them to see which contracts to work on first, second, and third, so that everyone in the squad can help one another. Beyond all of that, Your environment is pretty hazardous for obvious reasons. If you deploy to the Maelstrom or Solstice planets, you will end up in an archipelago of islands covered by the wreckage of a space station that came crashing down on the surface. That station belongs to the Upwell Consortium, and a lot of times you will be deploying to that planet to disrupt recovery or mining operations. If you deploy to the Aftermath planets, you end up in a jagged field of sharp rocks, craters, caustic swamps, and pools of cryogenic fluid caused by the crash site of a bowhead ship that was hauling industrial materials and clone banks up in space before it was attacked by pirates in the area. In these environments, the NPCs consist of drones that shoot at you or commit kamikaze-style attacks if you get close, automated turrets that target you when you cross their line of sight or attack them, patrols of Upwell agents and operatives, roaming bands of militias that surprise you with tripwires, and of course, other Vanguard players that will either work with you or attack you depending on their mood that day. The pools of cryogenic fluid in certain sections of the map do not cause any real damage, but they will slow you down the longer you remain on them. The caustic swamps through which you will certainly, the caustic swamps will certainly cause damage and kill you if you stand on them for too long. There are some fiery pits as well, and they do the same damage, just fire damage instead of caustic. And of course, you can die from falling too far, so watch your step. The terrain can get really confusing at times, and often your only cue is the location of different wrecks, the position of the sky hooks present in the sky, the local plant life you see, and of course the compass tape and map. It also does not help that the rocky paths and cave networks will weave around in confusing directions as you run through them. Alright. Regardless of which assignments you accepted, the map is populated with different objectives that are mostly unrelated to what you're supposed to be focused on. This means the map can get littered with different icons that make it rather difficult to quickly spot your main objective. This is where I think CCP should implement map filtering options to make it easier to spot your objectives. Keep in mind that many of these objectives are inaccessible until you accept their related contracts. However, there are some side objectives that do not require any contracts to access. One example would be the uplinks that pop up in the map where you walk in. Let me repeat that. One example would be the uplinks that pop up in the map where you walk in, hack the terminal, and defend it while waves of enemy forces come dropping in around you. Another example would be the mining rights, where you go to a location that is rich with mineral deposits and activate a mining drill that gets deployed to the ground. This one is rather simple, and all you need to do is keep the tethers aligned at each anchor point via a simple mini game similar to Helldivers 2. There is a lot of random loot boxes and tech panels all over the place where you can gather materials for crafting ammunition, equipment, and other stuff in the field. And of course, the enemy NPCs you kill will drop some loot on the ground, hidden inside the goo that forms when their body deteriorates into a million pieces. And finally, we get to the banks you will occasionally run into. These are either clone banks, where you can deposit at least 50 units of biomass you collect with each operative or player you kill to create an extra clone reserve in case you die. Or credit banks, where you can deposit credits and even materials you gathered from looting so that you will not lose those in case your clone dies. One last thing before moving on is the time you spend on the map is limited from what I can see. I estimate that each session can last up to 40 minutes before you have to extract or your clone gets terminated. Each session is divided into 4 stages, with the start of each stage resetting the loot and NPCs. Sometimes you get deployed during the latter stages of a session already in progress. This is where we get to the other main selling points of Vanguard. PvEVP, or PvPvE, depending on which rolls off your tongue better. One example are the contraband objectives, where you deploy stealth generators for an RDV, or remote deployment vehicle to arrive at from space. From there, the RDV lowers 2 boxes that you need to load up by raiding locked cargo containers. The locked cargo containers are a bit far off, but not too far off. Pop open one of the containers with the mining laser and bring the items to the RDV waiting for you. The contraband objective is an open objective. No contracts needed for this. Anyone can contribute to its completion just by being near it and help move the contraband items from the cargo containers to the RDV. The rewards are also tiered in 3 stages depending on how much of the contraband items you load up into the RDV before time runs out. Another example would be players choosing to cooperate to farm open objectives even when not in the same squad. But players do so at their own risk, as they will cooperate as long as there is an incentive to not kill you at that moment. Some will simply not let you help at all, so they will collect all the rewards for themselves. I ran into a lot of them. Resource gathering, such as mining, is yet another example of player cooperation, where one could dedicate to mining the materials from the deposits using their mining laser, while the other takes watch for any enemies nearby. Based on what I can see, the main point of all of this is to foster cooperation and competition at the same time through this mechanic known as PvEVP. This can also scale with, This can also scale with bastions, which are slated to be available for players once Vanguard launches with early access, and will be the physical link between Vanguard and EVE Online. This is similar to EVE Online, where players can either work together for a common goal or fight each other for either bragging rights or looting their wrecks. Corporations, alliances, and coalitions can form, which breeds competition and cooperation at the same time. Currently, Vanguard players only have one dropsuit, a modernized version of the Galente Scout dropsuit from Dust 514. Actually, you're seeing this right now, but minus the color. Ignore the paint job. That's my design. So let me go ahead and show you exactly how it would look like. Load it up. There we go. Pretty much this. This is how it looks. See, just like the old school Galente Scout from Dust 514, but modernized. Alright. So, what was I? Oh yeah, some of the NPCs can be seen wearing modernized versions of the Caldari Assault dropsuit from that era. One example are the Upwell operatives guarding certain loot crates. Let me show you. For those of you who don't know, let me show you. There we go. See? By the way, big thanks to Thaddeus Reynolds for getting me these avatars. A real trooper. Okay. Now, another example are the militias that pop out wearing what appears to be a mix of Mimitar Scouts and Caldari medium dropsuits patched together as one suit, while wearing a distinct rag around their neck and shoulders like a poncho. Some will come at you with a knife. Some can be seen wearing death-themed dropsuits that look like headhunters from Mordu's Legion. And then there are the elite soldiers wearing what appears to be highly technical dropsuits with a distinct pair of antennae sticking out from their backpacks. I often joke around calling them the evil Wi-Fi routers, because that's how they look to me. Let me give you an example. Yeah, there we go. Load up. Takes a while. It's been a while since I've actually used this. Hopefully it doesn't bug out. Server processing. There we go. Oop, my hip tracker just kind of like lost track. There you see. There you see the antenna in the back there. Basically how it looks. Well, not as bright as this. Like I touched up on the red a little bit but they are red. It's just a lot darker red, more like maroon, to be honest. Yeah. Beyond that, there are no more distinct drop suits to be seen, at least for Operation Nemesis, with the Galente Scout being the only wearable drop suit and the rest being used by NPCs. I'm wondering how long it'll be before they can start seeing more, before we start seeing more wearable options. Dust 514 had a myriad of different drop suit designs, ranging from the Amar Heavy, the Mimitar Logistics, uh, the Galente Assault, and the Caldari Scout. Let me give you some examples here. Now, this model, these four models I'm going to show you are from the PlayStation at Home version, so they're a little bit low poly. So, the Amar Heavy, this is a Caldari Scout. Oh, no, the Caldari Assault. I don't know why I said Scout. Then there's the Galente Scout. This one just feels awkward. This one, like, honestly, I think I like the modernized version better. And of course, the Mimitar Logistics. Dust 514 also had commando variants, which had the ability to carry two main weapons instead of a main weapon and a sidearm. Obviously, we can mix and match those weapons now in Vanguard without a problem. Unfortunately, that is all I can mention about the drop suits. They lack customization at the moment. Although CCP did bring up the idea of implementing drop suit fittings in the future in one of their podcasts. Let me switch back to my main avatar. There we go. All right. Moving on to the weapons. We got some interesting ones. While they are limited in variety, they are typically unique to the world of... They are totally unique to the world of New Eden. CCP talked about how a lot of the sci-fi shooters seem to stick with generic weapons like the AK-47s or AR-15s with fancy tech kit bashed together. They wanted to create weapons this time that look and feel like what you would expect from an advanced civilization 21,000 years into the future, isolated in an unknown star cluster. Of course, this sounds ironic given the Core 80 Reaver looking like another generic rifle. We can discuss their lore and stuff like this at a later time. This video is already too long. Now, the Core 80 Reaver is just your standard issue Mimitar rifle, with a unique function of switching between two ammunition types, kinetic and energy. Kinetic for punching through standard armor, and energy for overwhelming the enemy's personal shields. No other weapon in the lineup currently has ammunition variety let me say that again. No other weapon in the lineup currently has ammunition variety like the Reaver. But I imagine the other weapons would have their own variants one day. Now for the big boy itself, the Backlash shotgun. The blueprints and materials needed to fabricate one is awarded by completing the Mimitar expedition. This weapon has a hell of a punch, with shot shells that ricochet off surfaces, so you can get a nice kill around the corners. But what makes it even deadlier is when you aim down the sights, it will choke the barrel to focus the shot into a concentrated ball of death, turning the Backlash into a medium-range weapon. Modify this bad boy with chipsets, and you can already expect this thing to get nerfed by early access. Other than that, the aim down system gives a really satisfying mechanical sound that makes you feel you're about to ruin someone's day and possibly get a few choice words from your victim on proximity chat.
Threat on trace acquired.
Just saying. Lore-wise, the Backlash is Mimitar in origin. And if you already guessed it, like I did, that means the shotgun accomplished something that CCP Games was needing to do with the weapons, to reflect the philosophy and architecture of their respective empires. Next up, we go to the Lancer. This one is Amar in origin, probably because when you look at it, you think, just as God intended. Either that, or you happen to stumble upon it as a reward for completing the Amar expedition. This one uses focus shards as ammunition.
Dang, that guy can see me from way over there.
As to what it's really firing, I'm not exactly sure, since the shots behave more like bullets instead of laser beams, which have like a hit scan like behavior. It does pack a mean punch at a distance and can even do okay at medium and close distances. Probably because everyone around here is not moving around like a twitchy Apex Legends player. Now for the pistol. It is hard to say exactly whether the Volter pistol is Galente or Caldari. The model is clearly based off of the Ion pistol from Dust 514, which is a Galente design. But the visual model of the Volter makes it look Caldari with its sharp angles and color scheme. Functionally, though, they are the same. Tap the trigger for short bursts or hold the trigger for a full charge to unleash on the enemy. The Volter's reload animation is also the same, more or less, as the original Ion pistol. Unfortunately, it does not appear to support chipsets, so what you see is what you get. It has significant recoil even when tapping the trigger. The issue with this weapon, though, is you need to be really precise, as even a slight deviation is enough to miss entirely. Its ammunition consists of amp cells, with each holding up to 8 shots if you stick to tapping the trigger. But if you hold the trigger until fully charged and then let go of the trigger, it will discharge all 8 shots as one powerful bolt of plasma. This thing is great for popping drones in one shot. But you have to know what you're doing against other players with this thing. Now, other than the weapons, you do have optional equipment that you can craft in the field to help you, such as a deployable shield, proximity mines, grenades, motion scanners, and of course the signal beacon useful for extraction. Normally, if you have time and you are able to safely do so, you can always run towards the edge of the map and literally walk beyond the bounds of the map to trigger the automatic extraction sequence. This is useful for when you want to save resources or you don't have enough time to craft the resources needed for crafting a signal beacon. Sometimes you might not have a clear path to the edge of the map, or you don't have time to run over to it before the session timer runs out. This is a good use of the signal beacon, so that you can extract on the spot. Alternative equipment that you can deploy include the motion sensor, which can last around a minute, as well as deployable shields, grenades, and more. So now we move on to cover the industry side of Vanguard. This is one of those features that Dust 514 sorely lacked back in its day, and it was unable to be implemented for a myriad of reasons that is too long to cover in this video. Vanguard has ore deposits at different parts of the map where you can utilize the mining laser. Just like your weapons, the mining laser can utilize chipsets specifically made for it. In addition to that, The mining laser can be loaded with mining crystals to help improve the effectiveness of the laser. Do note that the default mining laser and default rifle do not have chipset slots. The ore deposits consist of small rock chunks clustered together, and all you have to do is aim the mining laser and hold the trigger to cut through it. The standard mining laser, the standard mining crystal that comes with it, works just fine, but it's a slow process. As you cut down each chunk, you acquire a small amount of minerals, and it will add up quickly as you go through several ore deposits in a single session. Once you clear out the ore deposits, a large rock chunk will appear with additional materials that you can take as a reward for sticking around. If you're that short on time or otherwise need to bail out, you can always take what you already have and run without completing the ore deposits and still come home with something instead of nothing. All right. Another use for the mining laser is as a cutting tool for getting into access panels of any structure. This is where you will likely find tech panels loaded with materials that you can use for crafting. Combine this with mining, and you can have a dedicated profession tailored towards providing materials that other players are looking for but don't want to be bothered with the boring part. Let me read that again. It's a long one. Combine this with mining, and you can have a dedicated profession tailored towards providing materials that other players are looking for but don't want to be bothered with the boring process of getting the materials. There. Next up, we move on to the fabricator. This is a simple manufacturing menu that you can access via the Fulcrum interface at the station. Obviously, this is where you combine the blueprints with the materials you gather during your deployments. In this game, there are two types: the blueprints and receipts. The recipes, the blueprints and recipes. Blueprints are consumable for up to a few uses, but you can always buy more using the credits you accumulate from the black market. Recipes are permanent and do not run out. These are not available in the black market. They appear to only be available upon completing certain expeditions. I recently earned my very first backlash recipe upon completing the Concord expedition. In my opinion, the fabricator needs more work. Inserting and removing the blueprints or recipes from the fabricator slot does not feel intuitive enough. Organizing fabricated items isn't much of a problem at first until you start piling up stuff later and forget that they exist, And on top of that, there's currently no sorting option either. I honestly prefer the workflow seen in EVE Online's manufacturing mechanic. It would also be nice to see the fabricator arms in the background move as your blueprint or recipe cooks in the oven. The black market is the primary source of purchasing blueprints for anything, ranging from weapons to ammunition and equipment. But do keep in mind that blueprints are consumable. Based on my personal anecdotal experience, the black market is severely limited in options. Limited blueprints for weapons, ammunition types, and more. But as we all know, Vanguard is still in pre-alpha, and so of course, the options are severely limited. My hope here is to see more weapons and equipment, and perhaps even drop suits after early access. Just hoping. I have my doubts we will ever see more options before early access due to all the other things that CCP Games has to work on before that happens. Especially with the bugs. For example, when purchasing the amp cell blueprint, like when I purchased the amp cell blueprint for the Volter on the black market, I only saw pop-up notifications of amp cell ammunition added to my inventory. But when I checked, I do not have neither the related blueprints nor the ammunition. The black market also does not sell any materials you need for manufacturing. Probably understandable, as providing such in the black market would negate the point of deploying, since the black market is exclusively NPC controlled. Although I think the black market could be used for initially seeding the eventual secondary markets that players want to see in the future. Now, this brings me to a related topic, the secondary markets. Now, keep in mind that this part of the topic is purely speculative, and it's pure speculation, as it is currently not in the game at this time, and there is no guarantee it will be implemented by early access. Keep that in mind. The difference between this and the black market is obvious. One is NPC controlled and curated by CCP Games, while the other is player controlled. One is steady and certain, while the other is chaotic and uncertain. For the sake of simplicity, I will refer to the player-controlled market as the secondary market. The black market can be referred to either by its name or as the primary market. Going back to the black market just for a little bit, I mentioned seeding the future secondary market. What this means is that CCP Games can choose specific materials and commodities to be sold on the black market that normally requires player acquisition during deployments, and the supply can be intentionally limited day by day or downtime by downtime. Let me give an example. Say you need Vordite to build an item you want with a blueprint. Your only option currently is to deploy down to the planets, search for that specific material, and then successfully extract with it. Seeding the secondary market with a black market item could help you get started without needing to deploy, assuming there is sufficient supply remaining that day. The main concern here, though, is the main concern. Let me start over. Sorry, the main concern here, though, is the possibility of Vanguard players exploiting the secondary market this way by constantly keeping up with buying all the seeded orders before they run out that day, and then sell them at a markup to other players. CCP does have ways to avoid this, as they do have decades of experience dealing with market shenanigans just like this through EVE Online. Here are some examples of how CCP can mitigate such exploitation. 1. Limit the seeded items to only the most common materials and scale their supply based on availability in the local regions. The more rare a material is, the less likely you will find it on the black market, and the more likely you're going to have to deploy for it. 2. Adjust the price of the seeded items on a quarterly basis. The secondary market could be used as a gauge on how expensive some common items are. This can easily cut into the margins of players who rely exclusively on buying up all the seeded orders for resale. And finally, CCP Games can choose to progressively cut back on the seeds as the players begin to slowly establish their own supply chains and logistical networks, to the extent that seeds become pointless to have. And CCP has done this in the past with EVE Online. Today, EVE Online has some of the most complex logistical networks and supply chains of any MMO out there. Once the secondary market is able to sustain itself, the black market can just be relegated to being a stepping stone for new bros to join, dip their toes in, and eventually be encouraged to participate in the secondary market in pursuit of greater riches. They can choose to specialize as marketeers, logistics managers, resource gatherers, and security, as gathering and moving supplies requires some protection. Again, this is all just speculation on my part. I will leave it up to CCP Games to decide how to best establish a secondary market, as this is something that requires careful planning and execution over the course of months or even years. Therefore, I do not think it will be a thing before early access unless CCP Games likes to give surprises. Alright. In its current form, Operation Nemesis only allowed me to do in-person trades on the field using a box or container I can drop my items manually into for sharing with other players, while using proximity chat. But the risk is obvious. The other players could simply kill me on the spot and take everything I got.
Free stuff. Free stuff over here. I got a trade. Offer for trade. Dude, would you shoot a merchant? Offering stuff over here. Free box. Right. Also, free stuff here as well. Free boxes here. Offering you free shit, man, and you just shoot me? That's low. Fucking bullshit. You shoot a merchant, huh?
Not exactly an ideal environment. Now that we covered the industry side of things, let's discuss the different game modes that we have right now in the Vanguard. Vanguard comes with at least two at the moment during Operation Nemesis. There's the free roam mode, and then there is Insurgency. Free roam is pretty much self-explanatory. As for Insurgency, it is currently a 9 versus 9 PvP only environment that is based on domination, where you have to capture some or all of the active cannons that are firing at one of the two mobile command centers, or MCCs. These are the ones that loiter in the area up above. One of these MCCs belong to you, and you need to defend it by capturing the cannons so that they focus fire on your opponent's MCC instead. The team that wipes out the opponent's MCC first wins. Three things I need to bring up here first. First, CCP was actively dealing with a bug where you lost your gear at the end of the match. Insurgency is where you bring your most decked out weapons and chipsets and not lose them upon dying. However, players reportedly lost them upon finishing the match, win or lose. Secondly, the number of players queuing into the game mode was pretty low. A few theories as to why. One is that the bug mentioned earlier has discouraged dedicated PvPers from jumping in. A second theory is everyone was too focused on completing the expeditions. And the third theory is the lack of visibility of the Insurgency mode, as the most prominently featured mode during this time was the free roam coupled with heavy focus on expeditions. And finally, the third thing I need to bring up, the lack of visibility given to Insurgency. The Insurgency map and mode was treated or otherwise mixed with the free roam maps, and the Insurgency map was treated or otherwise mixed in with the free roam maps, and especially when you look at the holographic map at the Fulcrum station, you could only see the mode when you look at the deployment screen where you select the map to go to. There you would see the Insurgency mode color-coded red compared to the yellow icons of the other maps. However, none of the expeditions even mentioned anything about joining an insurgency. I wonder if at least one expedition can be dedicated to insurgency. I wonder if that would help with this. Another idea, something more simple, is to create a prominent button near the deploy button at the bottom right corner, so that players can immediately see that there is an alternative mode available. I think CCP would likely prefer that simple method instead. This is not to say that insurgency was not fun. There were definitely players queuing up using the Discord Hangout voice chat to coordinate small matches where they challenged each other with things like who can stab the most with a knife. Clearly, they were having fun. It was just that there were not enough players queuing in to fill up the 9v9 slots. So, now what are we missing? I have brought this up in Discord. I have brought this up in the Discord a while back. But one of the most critical things that Vanguard should have, but is missing from Operation Nemesis, is a built-in test range. During the event, players had no way of knowing or getting a feel of the kits they built with the chipsets and weapons unless they deployed directly to the hazardous planets. CCP really needs to incorporate a proper test range, whether outdoors, indoors, or even a simulation, so that players can safely test their kits without risk of loss. Of course, there is the alternative of playing insurgencies, but I think CCP would like to prefer that simple method instead. This is not to say that insurgency was not fun. There were definitely players queuing up using the Discord Hangout voice chat to coordinate small matches where they challenged each other with things like who can stab the most with a knife. Clearly, there were not enough players queuing in to fill up the 9v9 slots. But as I mentioned earlier, that mode suffered a bug during the event. Another thing we're missing, and I covered this already, is the secondary markets. Then, of course, there are the bastions that are pending implementation. It has been confirmed by CSP Games that we will get them come early access. The first ones to come are the NPC controlled bastions, and then later down the line will be the player controlled bastions. This brings me to my next point. There were no corporations in Vanguard during this event. So far, the biggest group of players you were able to manage is a squad of 3 players max. I know CCP Games is clearly thinking about this because of how hard some of the players like Denny Fleetfoot have been drilling this request into CCP's head for years now. And then there's the lack of controller support. Right now you can use Steam settings to get around this, but the UI is not friendly to controllers as it was initially designed primarily for keyboard and mouse. This is another feature that players like Denny Fleetfoot have been bugging CCP for. Some players have certain disabilities that make it difficult to use with a mouse and keyboard as a gaming peripheral. And of course, there is the lack of Linux support. Something I brought up earlier in the beginning of this video. Of course, the market is currently way too small for CCP Games to get any viable return of their investment if they dedicated Linux support at any official capacity. So right now, the only hope is to get enough players who have Linux to come play Vanguard. This can help address the chicken and egg problem. As you can see, As you can see, this video was very long, and man, I went deep into this one. I think this is the longest script I've ever written to date for a single video game for a single video game topic. But overall, this comes to show how far along Vanguard has come compared to its previous iterations. It is, in my personal opinion, trying to accomplish on the PC what Dust 514 failed to accomplish on the PlayStation 3. I have lost count as to how many hours I've invested playing during Operation Nemesis. I have tried every mode, every weapon, as many chipsets as I could try out, fabricated as much as I could, bought from the black market as much as I could, communicated with proximity chat as much as I could, and completed as many expeditions and contracts as possible. Yes, it is clearly full of bugs and missing a lot of features that Dust 514 had, such as dropsuit fittings, planetary conquest, factional warfare, and vehicles, but it clearly has the potential to get there. And unlike Dust 514, Vanguard has CSP Collins as its game director, CSP Rattati as the EVE Online director, CSP Raven, CSP Lumi, and more. So the risk of mismanagement is very low. I honestly do not believe I can stress this enough, how actively engaged the dev team was with the community via Discord. I do not know how active they were on Reddit or Twitter because I do not use those platforms anymore. But I can tell you they went into overdrive on Discord during Operation Nemesis. The amount of feedback that was pouring in was crazy to keep track of. And yet the devs at CSP Games didn't miss a beat to respond. I'm still shocked at the amount of attention the devs gave to the Linux side of the feedback, despite having no official support for it. And they were taking in all of the technical details discovered by players on various Linux distros regarding how the launcher was handling, say, quotes or authentication tokens. The workarounds for making the game work on Linux and so on. They took those in. My hope now is for CSP Games to apply everything that they have learned from Operation Nemesis onto early access. From this point on, early access, in my opinion, is the make or break moment for Vanguard. Let me repeat that again. From this point on, early access, in my opinion, is the make or break moment for Vanguard. And from what I've seen so far, I have hope. More hope than what I had for Project Legion and Project Nova combined. I hope you all enjoyed this video. And as usual, fly safe. Oh, boy.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Let me see. No one can hear me. Mic check. Check.
Oh, you're a player. That's so weird. I was sitting here and your drop pod, like, arrow just appeared on top of me, and I was like, what is this, a quest?
Oh. Yeah, I'm an NPC. Yeah, you're the main character.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, what the fuck?